the webinar. I mean, we will record the webinar and share with you. But in case you need to record or transcript with IA, I will ask you please not to do it. And if you need it because of some accessibility measures, let us know. We will have some Q&A questions. I mean, you have the possibility to ask questions in the chat, in the Q&A section down at the top. But in case you need, for example, for journalists, if you need more, if you need to get in touch with us, we will have another session after this meeting where we can continue reviewing your questions and answering all what you need. So in order to provide some of the work we're doing here in Mexico and the situation, we have a great panel of participants. We have a great, we have Eric Rosenthal, Executive Director of Disability Rights International. We have my colleague Priscila Rodríguez, which works also on Disability Rights International. We have the participation of Rosa Idalia Aldana, which is a former member of the CRPD committee. She visited Mexico a couple of years ago, and she will let us know about her perspective. We have the great participation of Carlos Rios from Human Rights Watch. We will have Stephen Allen from Validity Foundation. Validity had a similar process in Hungary many years ago. We have Rosalinda Rodríguez, which is a person who has two girls with disabilities. And she is part of an organization called El Caracol in Mexico. We thank you, all of you, for being here. We thank the interpreters for their help. And in order to provide more context about the situation, we will share with you a video. It has a very sensitive images. We just want to clarify that, but they will show the reality of what we have seen, that the Disability Rights International have seen in the last 26 years in Mexico. So Majo, could you please help me with the video?
Sure. I just need to check if you can hear the audio, so I will play it.
Based on the petition to the...
Did you hear it?
Yes.
Okay, so
yeah.
Okay, so here it goes again.
Based on the petition to the United Nations submitted by Disability Rights International, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities released a powerful new report on Mexico. After an official investigation, the committee found serious and widespread human rights violations against persons with disabilities. According to the findings, children and adults with disabilities
We can't hear Majo.
I'm sorry?
I think the sound of the video, it's not working now.
Okay. I'm sorry about that.
including people with intellectual, learning, and psychosocial disabilities. Users, former users, and survivors of psychiatric services are being segregated in closed institutions. Instead of receiving support to live independently in their communities, many are deprived of their liberty in psychiatric hospitals, group homes, shelters, and orphanages, where violence and abuse are reported to be widespread. To prevent these abuses, the UN calls for many new legal protections and, most importantly, no new admissions of children or adults with disabilities to these closed institutions in Mexico. Since 2000, Disability Rights International, DRI, has documented widespread and systemic human rights violations against people with disabilities in Mexico, including children and women confined in institutions. DRI has documented people with disabilities, including children, being tied up for hours or even days in painful positions, forcibly medicated to control their behavior, locked in isolation rooms, even in cages. Girls, women, and children with disabilities are raped, They are forcibly sterilized. They are trafficked for forced labor and sexual exploitation. DRI repeatedly warned Mexican authorities about these abuses. The state ignored those warnings. Without concrete action to protect people with disabilities, impunity allows violence to continue inside institutions. People with disabilities remain segregated because community-based services do not exist. In 2020, Disability Rights International requested a United Nations inquiry into the grave violations occurring in Mexican institutions. After an extensive investigation, the committee is now issuing its inquiry report and recommendations. These abuses take place in psychiatric hospitals, orphanages, shelters, group homes, addiction rehabilitation centers, known as anexos, and other residential institutions.
A las personas en instituciones no se les permite tomar decisiones sobre sus propias vidas. Van desde las decisiones más pequeñas, como a qué hora me levanto, qué como, hasta las decisiones que tienen más impacto en la vida de una persona, como si formar una familia o no, y con quién, dónde y con quién vivir.
This reality can change. Around the world, experience shows that when governments invest in safe housing, healthcare, inclusive education, personal assistance, and strong community services, people with disabilities can live safely, independently, and with dignity in their communities. Children with disabilities need to grow up in a family, not in an institution. People with disabilities must be free to make their own choices.
This inquiry report is so important because it's the first time that the United Nations has ever looked at how all the parts of the social service, healthcare, and mental health systems work. And what they found is that there is pervasive segregation in Mexico. People with disabilities are locked up because of their disability.
This historic call provides a clear roadmap for change. The United Nations Committee on the Rights of People with Disabilities calls Mexico to create community-based services, stop violence against people with disabilities, provide housing and individualized supports, protect the choices and autonomy of people with disabilities, ensure access to justice, and investigate deaths in institutions, make monitoring and investigation results public, provide community-based reparations and culturally appropriate services.
El informe de Naciones Unidas y las recomendaciones representan una oportunidad para el Estado mexicano. Esta es una oportunidad para reformar los sistemas de salud mental, los sistemas de protección y los servicios sociales en favor de las personas con discapacidad. Todas y todos tenemos el derecho a vivir en la comunidad.
The time for delay is over. The opportunity is now. Disability Rights International is dedicated to promoting community inclusion and the full participation of people with disabilities in society. We have documented violence and abuse in institutions across more than 40 countries. Visit driadvocacy.org to view our reports and press coverage.
Thanks for sharing the video, Majo. Just as we can see, there's a lot of human rights violations that are systemic and grave in Mexico of people living in institutions. And now I will give the floor to Eric Rosenthal, the Executive Director of Disability Rights International, who can provide us more information about this. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Lisbeth, for that introduction and for the amazing video that you and Majo prepared. The Disability Rights International has worked for 25 years, more than that, to document the grave and systemic human rights violations that are taking place in Mexico's institutions. And we are deeply grateful for the United Nations and the CRPD committee to have acknowledged and recognized the findings that we have been working for decades to bring to public attention. It has now been 20 years since we've had the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, more than 25 years since Mexico itself went to the United Nations to sponsor the resolution that drafted the UN treaty, and 26 years since our organization, Disability Rights International, first broke this story with a 16-page presentation in the New York Times Magazine with those photographs of the horrors of institutions. With the United Nations report, we now have acknowledgement that institutionalization itself is a form of violence. It is no longer possible to say we're putting people in institutions to keep them safe until such point as we can get around to reforming our laws or creating services. No, people are not safe in institutions. People's lives are at risk. They are abused. They are subject to torture. They are exploited. They are trafficked. And the time is now, and international law requires it. I urge you to delve deeply into this report. The first 20 pages of recommendations and analysis almost could have been written about any country of the world that has institutions, but we have brought together incredible documentation, and the United Nations has put together a 40, 50-page summary of findings that gives you the texture of the horrors and dehumanization that would happen to people when they are segregated from society and locked up. And what cannot be denied after this report is that the grave and systemic abuses are the product of Mexicans' laws, of Mexico's policies, and Mexico's programs that lead to segregation and horrendous abuse. These must be brought to an end. And the recommendations are very detailed. Buried within them, you will see some rather amazing and historically important elements. One, no new admissions, a moratorium for children and adults with disabilities. We can't wait another 10, 20 years for new policies. We have to protect people from violence now by stopping institutionalization, and then working to create those community services becomes ever more urgent. This report is important because it gives texture and detail to what community services are. I was deeply touched when a former chief senior mental health official from the government of Mexico, who we had accused of perpetuating these abuses, came to us after he retired and said, "Thank you for everything you've done. We've been pushing on the inside for this, but so many people don't understand the changes that need to be making. What are community services?" The fact that they involve housing, a place for people to live, support to live in the community, healthcare, assistance, education. This is not rocket science. It's been proven effective all over the world. But the law, the CRPD, says people have a right to live in the community with choices equal to others. This report gives them a roadmap. I believe it can be a galvanizing impact on a growing disability rights movement in Mexico and in the world. We have no illusions that a report itself is going to lead to the transformation overnight, but we have been deeply pleased by the galvanizing effect and the support that we have received from other disability organizations, a growing and powerful movement, our alliances with Redeem, children's rights groups, with the women's rights groups, the intersectionality. We know that when people are abused in institutions, it's women, it's children, it's indigenous people, it's everyone living in poverty and at the margins of society who are most easily swept up. The lawyers, Mexico has made some important progress in its effort against legal guardianship, a right to legal capacity, a right to informed consent. But when there is no community services, there can be no choice. So the law has to be even stronger to stop this form of segregation. We have to create real, humane choices for people with disabilities. The movement is beyond Mexico. There is now a global effort. We are working with the Inter-American Coalition on Deinstitutionalization, and we thank the Global Coalition on Deinstitutionalization for their incredible support. This is part of a global movement now, and we believe that the UN's findings and recommendations can be a roadmap for reform around the world. There are important developments We have also worked with partners in Guatemala. We just won a case in the Inter-American Commission that's going to the court in the autumn to show that these rights are enforceable. And the Inter-American Court can recognize and build upon what the UN has done today in Mexico. And these will in turn reverberate back to activists demanding justice through the courts of Mexico. So it is a beginning of a process. We look forward to working closely with all of you, especially to our partners and our activists in Mexico. Thank you again for Lisbeth and Priscila Rodríguez, our associate director, who have literally put years of effort into this and who are helping us to lead the charge to demand enforcement. Let us not forget the lives of those children and adults locked behind those closed doors. If human rights is worth anything, it is that those human beings' lives must be valued and recognized, and we must give them a true opportunity to live their lives and be part of society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. And you have been documenting the situation of people with disabilities for years in Mexico, and this is the result of so many years of work here. So we are pleased to have some words from Ms. Heba Hagrass, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of People with Disabilities from the UN. She wasn't able to join us, but she sent us a video, and my colleague Majo will help us to see the video. Majo, thanks.
Sure.
Distinguished colleagues, friends, and advocates, I want to speak about a moment of profound importance for disability rights in Mexico and around the world. The United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities inquiry into Mexico conducted under Article 6 of the optional protocol of the CRPD. This inquiry is not routine. It is not symbolic. It is an extraordinary mechanism reserved for situations where there is evidence of grave or systematic violation of the Convention. The committee's decision to launch this investigation sent a clear message: the segregation, institutionalization, and exclusion of persons with disabilities in Mexico are not isolated incidents. They are systemic failures that demand urgent action. First, this inquiry brings recognition. For decades, persons with disabilities in Mexico have lived in institutions, often in conditions that violate their dignity, their autonomy, and their most basic human rights. Many have been invisible to society, unheard, and unaccounted. This UN inquiry validates their experiences. It acknowledges the harm they have endured, and it brings their stories into light of international scrutiny. Second, it establishes accountability. The committee's findings make clear that institutionalization in Mexico is not a matter of individual cases. It is a structural problem. It is rooted in discriminatory laws, in the absence of community-based services, and long-standing social attitude that treats institutional care as the default option. The inquiry demands not just policy adjustments, but systemic transformation. And third, it sets a global precedent. It joins a small but growing group of Article 6 investigations that clarify the meaning of the CRPD's core principles, especially the right to independent living and be included in the community. The committee's analysis strengthens global jurisprudence on deinstitutionalization. It reinforces the understanding that segregation is not a social policy choice. It is a human rights violation. So what does this mean for Mexico? The CRPD is clear. States parties must replace institutional models of care and support systems that enable people to live in the community with choices equal to others and control over the support they receive. For Mexico, this means several concrete obligations. It means repealing discriminatory laws, including guardianship regimes that strip people of their autonomy and funnel them into institutions. It means ending institutionalization as a policy and practice. The government must adopt a national deinstitutionalization strategy with clear timelines, budgets, and mechanisms of accountability. This means building a comprehensive network of human rights-based community support. Personal assistance, supported decision-making, accessible housing, inclusive education, and community-based mental health services that respect autonomy. These obligations are not optional. They are not aspirational. They reflect the CRPD's paradigm shift away from a medical and charity model of disability towards a human rights-based model. These implications of this inquiry extend far beyond Mexico's borders. Around the world, millions of children and adults with disabilities remain segregated in institutions, large and small, public and private, old and newly built. This inquiry reinforces several principles that are now unmistakably clear under international law. Institutionalization is incompatible with human rights. Segregating people with disabilities, regardless of the institutional size or stated purpose, violates the CRPD. The institutionalization of children is never justified. Placing a child in with disability in an institution, even for care or protection, violates their rights to family life, development, and inclusion. States must dismantle institutional systems, not modernize them. The inquiry rejects the idea that institutions can be improved. The only acceptable path is transition to community-based living. And finally, international oversight is strengthening. As more Article 6 inquiries are conducted, global expectations for compliance with Article 19 become clearer, firmer, and more enforceable. I encourage the government of Mexico to work with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to develop the deinstitutionalization plan and to reflect CRPD standards in the development of care and support systems. I particularly bring the attention to the report's considerations of the private sector with the reported 4,000 institutions and its transformation under the CRPD and the UN guidelines principles on business and human rights. Institutionalization is not care. The UN inquiry into Mexico is a turning point. It is a call for action, not only for Mexico, but for every country that continues to segregate people with disability behind institutional walls. I thank you all.
We're very thankful for the words of Heba Hagrass, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of People with Disabilities. I think she gave us a message that summarizes all the work and the international and the implications at the international level. Now I will give the floor to my colleague, Priscila Rodríguez. She is the Associate Director of DRI and Women's Health and Justice Initiative for DRI around the world. Priscila, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lisbeth. And I want to start by thanking everyone who's joining us today, especially our distinguished panelists, including
current and former members of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's wonderful to see so many friends, familiar names in the list of participants today, as well as new names. And for that purpose, for that reason, I'm gonna just step back a little bit and talk a bit about the context of in which this inquiry takes place. As many of you are experts on, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2006. And this convention is considered a historical document that proposes a paradigm shift on the way we see and treat people with disabilities. Historically, we've treated them as objects of and recipients of charity and people we must protect, but often we end up violating their rights. So what the convention does is recognizes them as persons with disabilities who are subjects of rights. So with the adoption of the CRPD, it's no longer a matter of good government policy or goodwill from the government to recognize the rights of persons with disabilities. It is now an obligation under international law to guarantee, promote, and protect their rights, but most of all, so to not violate them. In this case, as it has already been shared by Eric Rosenthal and Ms. Hagrass, the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities finds that Mexico is actually violating in a systemic scale the rights of people with disabilities, recognizing the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, including the right to live as part of a community with the supports and services that they need. So what is an inquiry? Actually, an inquiry is recognized, as Ms. Hagrass said, in Article 6 of the optional protocol to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So it's a separate document that states can ratify, and Mexico has ratified it. And the protocol allows individuals or groups of individuals to file complaints against a state for violating the rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And these complaints are filed or taken to the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is the body in charge of interpreting the convention and evaluating its implementation. So the committee, under Article 6, when the committee receives reliable information that indicates grave or systemic violations by a state party, in this case Mexico, the committee will carry out an investigation to document whether these violations are actually taking place at a grave or systemic level. In the case of Mexico, the UN committee, as we have mentioned, found that violations being committed against people with disabilities are both grave and systemic. So why Mexico? Why did we file this inquiry request to the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities? Well, we'll hear from Stephen Allen from Validity, who did a similar process in Hungary. And when the UN Committee inquiry report on Hungary was published, we had a conversation with him, and Validity under work in Hungary was our inspiration. I hope he'll share more about that, about what they did in Hungary. But when we talked to him about the process in Hungary, he said the main thing that you need for an inquiry is a lot of documentation because of the nature of the inquiry that needs to prove that it's systemic, which means that it's happening broadly, that it's affecting tens of thousands of people. In the case of Mexico, more than 100,000 people. As Eric mentioned, we've worked in Mexico for over 25 years now, documenting the situation of people with disabilities. It's the country where we have published the most reports. We have a lot of documentation, which we shared with the committee for them to decide whether that documentation was enough for them to consider to starting an inquiry. And I'm very grateful for the people that are going to speak after me, including the members of the committee that participated in the inquiry, and Ms. Rosidalia Aldana and Mr. Marcus Scheffer, who will also be able to share more about the process and their findings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Priscilla, for your words and for showing the importance of the inquiry and why Mexico. Now we'll give the floor to my colleague Carlos Rios from Human Rights Watch in Mexico. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Buenos días, buenas tardes a todas y a todas las personas que están en este webinario. Agradezco a Disability Rights International y a la Alianza Global por la Desinstitucionalización su gentil invitación para reflexionar sobre los hallazgos y recomendaciones del informe de la investigación sobre México realizada por el Comité en virtud del artículo 6 del Protocolo Facultativo de la Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad. El informe expone con claridad una realidad que no admite matices. En México, de acuerdo con cifras oficiales, cerca de 119,000 personas con discapacidad viven en instituciones, muchas de ellas durante años, incluso por la vida toda, privadas de la posibilidad de construir una vida en comunidad. Se trata de un patrón estructural que persiste y que el comité reconoce. Las investigaciones de Human Rights Watch y el trabajo conjunto de incidencia con organizaciones locales confirman este diagnóstico. En el centro del problema está la ausencia de servicios comunitarios suficientes, accesibles y de calidad. Asistencia personal, servicios de salud en la comunidad, apoyos para la toma de decisiones, vivienda accesible, inclusión laboral y educación. Sin estos apoyos, las personas son empujadas a la institucionalización o a esquemas de dependencia familiar forzada, limitando su autonomía. México ha avanzado en el reconocimiento formal de derechos, pero sin implementación adecuada, estos avances se han quedado en el papel. Permítanme destacar dos ámbitos. El primero es el consentimiento informado en salud. A pesar de la reforma de 2022 a la Ley General de Salud, que establece fuertes reglas de consentimiento informado y un enfoque de recuperación, los tratamientos involuntarios persisten. La ley establece que los internamientos deben ser voluntarios y prohíbe la contención física o química sin excepciones, pero su implementación no ha sido significativa. Faltan reglas administrativas claras, equipos interdisciplinarios y mecanismos de supervisión, mientras subsisten normas estatales contrarias a la ley general que por disposición constitucional debe prevalecer. Aquí el desafío no es únicamente normativo, es, sobre todo, interpretativo y operativo. Más que insistir en nuevas reformas, se requiere una lectura rigurosa y coherente del marco jurídico vigente a la luz de los derechos humanos. Una lectura que tanto el Estado mexicano como el propio comité han soslayado. Sin ella, el cambio de paradigma no sucederá en la práctica. El segundo ámbito es la capacidad jurídica. México reconoce ya la capacidad jurídica plena de todas las personas de 18 años o más, así como los apoyos para la toma de decisiones. Sin embargo, su implementación sigue siendo incipiente. Jueces y operadores jurídicos continúan aplicando esquemas de sustitución de la voluntad. La implementación requiere trabajo conjunto con organizaciones de personas con discapacidad, así como la participación de comisiones de derechos humanos, abogados y notarios. Es importante reconocer el papel del Colegio Nacional del Notariado Mexicano y el Colegio de Notarios de la Ciudad de México y otros colegios que se han sumado a este proceso. Pero la responsabilidad principal recae en el Estado. Y hasta ahora no se observa un esfuerzo articulado, sostenido y con liderazgo que permita superar el carácter fragmentario de los avances. La implementación no puede depender de iniciativas aisladas. Se requiere una estrategia nacional clara, acompañada de capacitación sistemática a operadores jurídicos y de salud, así como la creación de un punto focal con atribuciones efectivas de coordinación, capacidad de incidencia interinstitucional y un presupuesto robusto que garantice la continuidad y escala de las acciones. Sin estos elementos, la reforma difícilmente se traducirá en cambios reales. La discusión sobre un sistema de cuidados y apoyos abre una oportunidad que no debe desaprovecharse. Debe servir para impulsar planes de desinstitucionalización, tanto a nivel federal como estatal, y abandonar definitivamente la idea de que la institucionalización es una forma alternativa de cuidado. Estos planes deben articularse a través de un punto focal que coordine sus múltiples dimensiones. Finalmente, es indispensable que las organizaciones de personas con discapacidad, las organizaciones de derechos humanos, el sistema ombudsman, los colegios profesionales, las familias y los colectivos de la agenda de cuidados y de derechos humanos de las personas con discapacidad articulen una exigencia clara y sostenida al Estado mexicano para la creación de un grupo de trabajo permanente que dé seguimiento puntual a los hallazgos del comité. No se trata solo de una recomendación, sino de una condición para que este informe tenga consecuencias reales. Sin una apropiación activa por parte de los actores y sin su traducción en demandas concretas, el cambio, el informe, corre el riesgo de diluirse en el ámbito declarativo y convertirse en un documento más, sin impacto en la vida de las personas. Agradezco mucho su atención. Desafortunadamente me voy a tener que desconectar pronto, pero daré seguimiento puntual a la grabación de este importante evento. Muchas gracias nuevamente.
Thank you, Carlos, for your participation. And I think you addressed very important issues in Mexico. One is the articulation between the different systems and actors and the state government that should and need to provide a response to this report. We have a couple of questions in the chat, so if you would like, we can go to this. And some people, Deborah Lay is asking if there's some work, intersectional work with climate change and people with disabilities, because she thinks it's an area that still needs to be worked on. Thank you, Deborah, for your question. I think as part of DRI, we have been investigating, for example, in climate crisis, we went to Acapulco in 2023 after Otis hurricane, and we realized that people with disabilities is still segregating even when there's a crisis, and the response from the state is still on institutionalized people instead of creating services under this crisis. So also in the chat, Sarai is asking what to do in the case of a guy with a disability who was denied of his a job because of his mental health condition. And he was okay, he was stable, but he was removed from his job after the people knew he had a mental health diagnosis. I think, Sarai, in this case, there are some local avenues that you can take, for example, in the National Council for the Prevention of Discrimination and other local bodies that can help you. If you can contact me, we can talk more about that. Gabsa Garson, it's another, here in the chat says, where you can find the UN reports on this recording, it's baseless if the governments of countries don't show the proof. We want to see the evidence. I'm part of the CRPD Forum of AIRA. Safe environments, imperative job creations, those that get mostly disability social grants is unacceptable. That doesn't fulfill the basic needs and special needs is happening this globally. and his son regards. And I think he's right. This is not only happening in Mexico. We need to have more coordination at the international level, to have more funding and support at the international community to develop our work at national level. Thank you. Here, Sabiha Mahid, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name right, says, my question is directed to DRI. Did DRI experience any challenges during visit and investigations of institutions? And for this question, I will leave Priscila to reply. Priscila, could you please help me with this question?
Yes, could you please repeat it?
Did DRI experience any challenges during visit and investigations of institutions?
I mean, DRI has been visiting institutions for over 20 years, as has been mentioned before. And yes, it's sometimes challenging to access, specifically public facilities. And it's become harder as our work is more known.
Thank you. And actually, the inquiry reports has a recommendations that the monitoring of external people, for example, NGOs, should be recognized or work as monitoring institutions. Now, as we continue with the program, Catherine Pedreros, the representative of the Secretary of the UN Committee of the Rights of People with Disabilities, couldn't join today. So we'll give the floor to Rosa Idalia Aldana, the former member of the CRPD committee. She visited Mexico in 2024. She visited institutions, met with people with disabilities, with families. So she has a very interesting point of view since her experience in the committee and her visit in Mexico to what happened. Rosa Idalia, the floor is.
Muchas gracias. En primer lugar, quiero agradecer a DRI por esta invitación y un saludo muy particular también a todos los honorables integrantes de las organizaciones de sociedad civil. Por permitirme participar en este informe, en esta presentación. Deseo expresar evidentemente mi más sincero reconocimiento por este importante esfuerzo que no solo visibiliza las realidades históricas ignoradas, sino que también traza una ruta muy clara hacia la garantía efectiva de los derechos humanos de las personas con discapacidad y en particular a su derecho de vivir de forma independiente y a ser incluidas en la comunidad. En efecto, este informe también va o constituye desde ya una herramienta fundamental para el fortalecimiento del Estado de Derecho, así como es una oportunidad histórica, no solo para México, para impulsar transformaciones estructurales basadas principalmente en la dignidad, la igualdad y la justicia. Desde que fui invitada particularmente a participar en este evento fue como recordar o incluso revivir todo el proceso que en aquel momento como miembro del comité conllevó. Me hizo incluso revivir emociones que durante la visita personalmente experimenté y puedo mencionar algunas cuestiones muy particulares como frustración, impotencia, incluso cada vez que recuerdo esa experiencia, hasta incluso se despiertan mis propios otros sentidos, porque hasta ciertos olores de los lugares que tuvimos la oportunidad de estar representan algo muy impactante en la vida de cada uno de los que hemos tenido la oportunidad de trabajar o ver directa, de primera mano y no desde un lente, ¿verdad? Especialmente es preocupante la situación de los niños, de las niñas, de las mujeres con discapacidad, quienes enfrentan múltiples formas de discriminación, de violencia, y evidentemente esto requiere de una atención interseccional que de hecho el comité en su momento también reconoce incluso en las guías de desinstitucionalización. Conocimos numerosos casos en la visita de niños y niñas institucionalizadas debido muy particularmente a la falta de apoyos para sus familias, y muchas veces hasta incluso fueron arrebatados niños en donde se les prometió una mejora en la vida y se suponía que eran estancias temporales, y esas estancias se volvieron hasta incluso no solo de larga duración, sino en algunos casos que ya fueron mencionados de manera permanente. Habían muchas rutinas en estas instituciones y unas rutinas claramente monótonas, muy repetitivas, sin considerar la voluntad propia de las personas que allí se encontraban. Y estas rutinas, puedo mencionar, constituían levantarse, desayunar, almorzar, cenar, dormir. Pudimos observar muchísima medicalización. No existen directamente programas permanentes de capacitación o habilitación. Las personas que permanecen ahí pareciera no tener como un propósito, ayudarles a encontrar un propósito de vida, ¿verdad? Precisamente por la ausencia de estos programas permanentes y esas oportunidades para aprender y desarrollar o potenciar sus propias capacidades. Quiero hacer referencia también a que durante esa visita, y que me identifica mucho con México, porque no solo por la cercanía geográfica, sino también porque las realidades latinoamericanas son muy parecidas y vivimos muy similares los procesos de exclusión y discriminación, las personas con discapacidad. Hay una situación que hasta la fecha a veces tengo de verdad pesadillas. Me impactó mucho encontrar por ejemplo, una institución, incluso una sala en donde estaba todavía la camilla y el mismo personal, en donde se daban los procesos de sujeción, y todavía persisten las terapias de electroshock, y que el personal lo hablara como qué bonito era, ¿verdad? Y como les explico, todavía cuando lo recuerdo, sí experimento una serie de emociones que podemos imaginar lo que las propias personas que viven en esas condiciones sienten día con día. Hay el abandono que tienen las personas, o que experimentan las personas en condición de institucionalización, es realmente impactante. No solo manifiesta o refleja esa falta de atención adecuada, sino que también hay una completa desvinculación emocional. Las personas con discapacidad son frecuentemente olvidadas incluso por sus propias familias, debido precisamente a esa falta de apoyos para poder vivir en comunidad. Y con el tiempo, estas personas se convierten en personas prácticamente invisibles, no cuentan con visitas, no tienen contactos para nada con el exterior, y se va perdiendo de manera progresiva esa esperanza de poder reintegrarse a la sociedad. Y la realidad para ellos es un confinamiento indefinido, donde sus derechos son ignorados y sus vidas se ven reducidas a meras rutinas repetitivas, ya que deambulan por todas las instituciones o los centros, sin rumbo, sin un objetivo, sin un propósito, y por supuesto ello menoscaba día a día su dignidad. La institucionalización no define solamente al lugar, al edificio, esa parte en concreto, sino que también define a esos procesos de control, ¿verdad? A ese control en donde la persona no tiene privacidad, la persona no decide, la persona no puede elegir, la persona no puede participar, y la ausencia de un proceso real de transición, el cual debe ser, o sea, debe ser estructural, y no individual. Otro aspecto que es alarmante es esa persistencia de cámaras, una constante vigilancia en todos los espacios como comunales, como decir patios, pero también en los dormitorios, en pasillos y hasta en baños y duchas, una ausencia completa del derecho a la privacidad. Eso revela, por supuesto, una violación clara a la privacidad de los residentes que están en esas instituciones. Siempre se aducía que era por su propia seguridad, pero no bajo ningún concepto eso se percibe así. Otra cosa interesante era que pues cada una de las instituciones estaban ubicadas suelen estar ubicadas como en lugares remotos, no precisamente en los núcleos capitales, ¿verdad? Sino que muy lejos de los entornos urbanos, y eso nos proyecta también ese sentido de abandono, ese sentido de que no se mire, de que sea prácticamente invisible, y obviamente ello contribuye a un mayor aislamiento de todas las personas que ahí residen. Y en mi opinión, eso es muy personal, es como negar o es como esconder la propia existencia de estas personas con discapacidad. Y en ese sentido, pues resulta urgente que el Estado de México y toda Latinoamérica implemente una estrategia integral de desinstitucionalización que incluya no solo el cierre progresivo de esas instituciones, sino también la reasignación de recursos, los recursos que han destinado o siguen destinando para que funcionen estas instituciones, que se ha destinado para servicios comunitarios y para fortalecer esos apoyos personalizados para las personas con discapacidad. Y aquí entra también en relación con ello, finalizo, el trabajo colaborativo que debe y que puede existir con los medios de comunicación para realmente, a través del artículo al que se refiere a la toma de conciencia, se pueda hacer visible esta situación que día con día viven las personas con discapacidad, que están en una situación de institucionalización bajo ninguna perspectiva, bajo ningún lente, y también que contraviene los principios y lo que establece la convención. Yo quiero agradecer, finalizo con el reconocer y agradecer a DRI y a cada una de las personas que día con día hacen posible que se visibilicen todas estas realidades de las personas con discapacidad.
Muchísimas gracias, Rosaedalia, por tu participación, por compartirnos tu experiencia vivida de lo que fue para ti estas visitas a las instituciones en México. Lo agradezco enormemente, y veo que Marcos Schaeffer se unió a la reunión. So Marcos Schaeffer is a part of the CRPD committee. So we thank you for being here with us. We really appreciate your participation in this webinar, and I'll give you the floor, Marcus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisbeth. I hope you can hear me well. I'm not in the best place for this, but I hope it's working. Thank you very much for inviting me to say a few brief words on this inquiry process. I certainly share Rose Dahlia's emotions, the impact it had on a personal level. I would, however, focus somewhat more on the law. Being a lawyer, the inquiry process found that there are serious or systematic violations of the convention. So this is the standard that the optional protocol in Article 6 sets. And why did we find this? First, the convention guarantees the right to independent living. Independent living, Rose Dahlia alluded to it, guarantees that you're not put into an institution that restricts your freedom to live as you please. That in turn requires the state to provide community support services so you can live independently, not in an institution. Now, the systematic nature of institutionalization in Mexico, we found, first gets highlighted by the fact that at least, and this is the absolute lowest number we could come up with, about 140,000 children with disabilities and more than 120,000 adults with disabilities are in institutions in the country. Now, this in itself, the fact in itself that the state party is unable to provide precise numbers, even rough numbers, shows that there is a problem when you have six-figure numbers and you don't even know how many. This is compounded by the fact that the state party does not know how many institutions there are in the country. It does not know how many private institutions they have, how many institutions on the community level they have. So just the numbers show that institutionalization is a serious issue, that a violation of the right to independent living is of a serious nature. The seriousness of institutionalization is compounded by the fact that we found in the institutions we visited, and Rosa Dahlia alluded to it, that the situations, the conditions in these institutions are, at least those that we visited, are abysmal. It is not just a lack of independence in how you lead your life. It becomes much more severe by a total lack of support even within institutions. We have visited institutions that were designed for people to stay for maybe 6 months. And we found that people in there that had languished in these places for 35 years, spending their days without any sense of support, just sitting outside, looking ahead of them, staring into the void without any support. So the institutionalization itself seems to be, we found, is a fallback position that a person with disabilities face if the situation in which they find themselves is such that they don't have the support of their family, that maybe their family is unable or unwilling to support them. And institutionalization must not be a fallback position. If it is of a systematic nature, and that's why it fulfills the requirements of Article 6. We've spoken to many different persons with disabilities, children with disabilities, older women with disabilities, indigenous children with disabilities in psychiatric institutions. To this day, I have a little present on my fridge at home that I got from a good 10-year-old girl in one of those institutions. And throughout our interviews, it has become blatantly clear that there was no sense from the side of the state party that there is anything wrong with institutions like these. And that is an alarming situation. Now, it is not so that necessarily discrimination and violence in such institutions is perpetrated with bad intent, as weird as this may sound. I have talked to a director of an institution who told me, look, I didn't know places like these exist in the country until I was assigned this job to lead this institution. So this cannot be reduced to individuals acting badly. This is a systematic problem that the country has. The systematic problem pertains to institutionalization as such, but also to the neglect, mistreatment, in some cases, even torture-like situations that we found. So we must not reduce the problem to individualized issues. It is of a systematic nature. We've, as Rosa Dalia mentioned, we've encountered time and again the situation that persons in institutions were forgotten by their family, or their family didn't exist anymore. They did not have anybody outside with whom they were in contact. That in turn led to their being entirely dependent on the staff and the director of the institution. This in turn led to the situation that even though many of these people would have had the right to get government support, financial support, most of them, of course, didn't know that they had that right, and most of them didn't apply for such support. And only in a few situations, the director of an institution was actively engaged in getting the financial support from the side of the state, filing the applications necessary. We've seen that one of the red threads that went through the situations we've encountered was a lack of access to justice. And this is crucial. If you're alone and you have a complaint, you must have low threshold procedures where you can lodge a complaint without any fear of retribution. We did not find any institution that had such a possibility that was actually used. And maybe to wrap up, let me say a few words on the context in which we found ourselves. We found ourselves in Mexico with government officials that were not very conducive to enabling us to perform an inquiry that would find the important violations. We were not in a situation to visit institutions unannounced, something that should be an absolute standard. This led, and this is Rosa Dali also mentioned, led to situations where we smelled, when we entered an institution, chlorine. Chlorine, of course, you saw the bubbles in the gutters from freshly washed places. In one institutions. A woman with an intellectual disability greeted the director and told her, "Ma'am, it smells so good today." She would not have said this if it was an everyday occurrence. So the government wasn't very active in supporting us. It was an experience that I think shows us that the state party and their officials require a fundamental change in attitude toward persons with disabilities and toward the state's party's obligations under the convention. Not just champion the convention in foreign policy contexts. That Mexico does, but take it seriously internally and effect the necessary change. Civil society will be crucial for this. You cannot count on the committee. The treaty body system is hardly working currently. But I again thank Disability Rights International very much for presenting us originally with the dossiers that allowed us to open the inquiry and to supporting us during the inquiry. And we sincerely hope that our report can contribute to your future work in eradicating mass institutionalization compounded by conditions in institutions that are very often inhumane. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, I thought we had lost Lisbeth. I also just wanted to really thank you, Mr. Schäfer and Ms. Aldana, for your findings and for your work towards this inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you, Marcus, for your work, for your words and the work you have done. Now I will give the floor to Stephen Allen from Validity Foundation. He's the executive director. Thank you, Stephen, for being our ally in all these processes, for all your experience. It's been very helpful for us. Please share about your experience in Hungary. Tell us more about what happened and what it's been the result after the inquiry.
Thank you so much, Lisbeth. Greetings to everyone. I'm delighted to join you, and it's been a privilege and a pleasure, a real honor for my organization, the Validity Foundation, to both work with you, but also the committee and the secretariat over these years, to challenge really this historic atrocity of mass institutionalization of persons with disabilities. Let me make a few remarks. The inquiry procedure under the optional protocol really is a unique international truth-finding mechanism. Unlike the communications procedure, which addresses individual complaints, inquiries are designed to investigate credible information indicating grave or systematic violations of the convention by a state party, in this case, Mexico. Whereas UN treaty bodies traditionally focus on periodic reports and constructive dialogue, the inquiry procedure equips the committee with investigative powers to conduct these confidential inquiries, undertake country visits, and issue findings that are both quasi-judicial and binding as a matter of international law. It follows, therefore, that triggering such an inquiry is a hard endeavor. The threshold is very high. And let's pause for a moment to reflect on what that means. The concept of grave and systematic violations in international human rights law has its roots in the post-World War II consensus. What it tells us is that some abuses are so serious, so embedded in systems of law, policy, and practice that they demand a heightened level of international scrutiny. This places the CRPD inquiry procedure alongside other similar mechanisms under instruments including the Convention Against Torture and the optional protocol to CEDAW. Across these systems, there is a shared understanding among the international community that grave violations refer to severity of harm. In this case, serious physical or psychological abuse, long-term, often irreversible damage, and violations of core human rights. And systematic violations reflect patterns. These abuses are not isolated, but they are repeated. They are predictable. They are rooted in Mexico's legal frameworks, in Hungary's institutional practices, in the budgetary choices of governments who continue to place disabled people behind the doors of institutions, often for life, and they are deeply embedded in discriminatory social attitudes. Inquiries, therefore, seek to answer two fundamental questions. What is happening, and why is it happening again and again? And indeed, the significance of this report lies precisely here. I've read the factual report which accompanies the inquiry, and it is deeply harrowing, something I believe we all got a sense of just now from the testimonies of Rosa Idalia and even Marcus as a lawyer. Let me tell you, I have felt the same feelings in institutions in Hungary, across Europe and Africa. I have smelt that same bleach. Once again, the committee has found that the persistence of institutionalization is not a marginal issue. It is not a failure of implementation, but it is a core human rights violation. In doing so, the committee has built clearly on its earlier inquiry into Hungary, where the committee identified the combined systems of mass institutionalization and guardianship as producing grave and systematic harm. And let me tell you, even today, we continue to use the report concerning Hungary to push for reparations and redress for all of the people in that country, and we will continue to do until the doors are open for all. The Mexico inquiry takes the committee's analysis even further, particularly through an intersectional lens, highlighting the compounded impacts on women, children, indigenous persons, migrants, and those living in poverty. And importantly, it advances a more developed vision of reparative justice for survivors of institutionalization, building on the committee's 2022 guidelines. What emerges is a very clear message that I fully support. Institutionalization on the basis of disability is not merely an historical relic. It is not an unfortunate legacy, which both Hungary and Mexico have argued will fade with time. It is a present-day system deeply embedded in the laws, policies, and practices of those states, one that continues to confine people, separate families, deny legal capacity, and expose individuals to violence, neglect, and abuse. And as in Hungary, this report makes clear that for many, institutionalization is not temporary, it is in effect a life sentence. No more clearly can we see this than when we also hear Hungary and Mexico advance the argument that it will simply take generations to change the system. We cannot accept that. This is why this committee's conclusion matters so profoundly. It confirms that everyday systems of purported care, of protection, systems that so many still consider to be benign, can and do produce grave harm when they are built on exclusion and control rather than rights, autonomy, and inclusion. Eric rightly said that institutionalization is a form of violence. And after 2 decades of visiting institutions detaining people allegedly on the basis of providing them with care and treatment, myself, the son of a woman who did not survive her detention in a psychiatric institution, I can attest to the sheer scale and depth of what has been simply termed the banality of evil. Another notable aspect of this report that demands real attention from all is the extent to which this committee has placed a strong focus on the differing harms on different populations of people with disabilities, on women with disabilities who have their sexual reproductive health and rights gravely violated in both Hungary and Mexico, on children with disabilities who once they enter institutions rarely ever leave and are torn from their families in both Hungary and Mexico, on Indigenous persons who experience multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, and Roma with disabilities who end up in institutions for life in Hungary, and of course, the severe impacts on those coming from poverty. If we take this report seriously, then the implications are unavoidable. The harm must end. And the harm that has already been done must be recognized, addressed, and repaired. That requires more than simple reform. It requires full transformation of laws, of services, of budgets, and of the way we understand disability itself. And let me also give a very clear message to the large international aid donors who will be looking now at this report. Do not make the mistake of the European Union to continue funding the refurbishment or the rebuilding of institutions purportedly to improve dignity. Whether big or small, institutionalization is a violation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Put your funding into the community support and into the hands of the survivors. And let me also be clear about another point. The call for a moratorium on new admissions is absolutely critical. But the nature of the violations uncovered here require us to go even further. Indeed, as the inquiry makes clear under Article 14 of the Convention, unlawful deprivations of liberty mean that people must also be released. Now, not in 30 years, as Hungary once promised, nor in a generation from now, as Mexico says it will take to reform the system. No, they must be released now. And as such, I again urge Mexico, Hungary, and all other countries that maintain these systems of institutionalization to end this atrocity and to provide reparations to the victims. That starts with letting people out and immediately providing them with both individual and systemic reparations, including public apologies and guarantees of non-repetition. I commend you, Lisbeth, Priscila, Eric, the entire DRI team for your assiduous, tireless documentation, advocacy, and your legal actions to shine a light on the rights and lives of people who are so often locked away. Indeed, my team with validity stand with you as we do with all survivors of institutionalization globally. Let me also commend the CRPD committee, the Secretariat of the CRPD committee, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for your fearless commitment to the rights of persons with disabilities and for strengthening this reparative approach to one of the gravest and most systematic violations of the rights of persons with disabilities worldwide today. because this report goes far beyond Mexico, far beyond Hungary. It is about confronting both a historic and a present-day harm that we must all collectively end. I will close by opening an invitation to all of you who want to build on the Hungary and Mexico inquiries. Let's meet together, let's share our knowledge and experiences, and let's collectively commit to raising the voices of survivors themselves, to worldwide, to lead this change. Lisbeth, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for your words and for all the work you have done, and also the legal analysis that you show comparing Hungary and Mexico. I think it's been great. And now we'll give the floor to Rosalinda Rodríguez. She has 2 girls with disabilities, and she has many challenges to live outside in the community. And I think the most important is to hear the voices of the people who is suffering the reality in Mexico. I mean, we have visited institutions, but she lives this reality every day. So, Rosalinda, adelante, por favor. Ahora sí que cuando gusten.
Pues buenos días.
Gracias.
Mi nombre es Rosalinda y pues más que nada me da mucho gusto que me hayan tomado en cuenta en estar con ustedes. Pues más que nada, pues yo fui una persona de situación de calle y pues yo la verdad, más que nada yo viví mucha vivencia con personas con discapacidades en situación de calle. Y la verdad para mí eso era muy difícil porque pues yo que hubiera querido ayudarla con una casa o algo, ¿no? Pero pues yo no podía más, que podía en ayudarla como empujar su silla de rueda o poderles dar de comer, porque no nada más bueno, ellos no están porque quieren ahí, sino porque son abandonados desde muy niños, porque nacen con discapacidades y van y los abandonan en la calle. Y ya la familia se pierde, o mismo ya siendo adulto va su misma familia, los pone en la calle y ahí lo dejan abandonado. Y entonces yo tuve mucha convivencia y vivencia con ellos en todo lo que pasaban ellos, y la verdad yo veía que pues el gobierno la verdad nunca ha visto a la persona de calle, porque siempre hay mucha discriminación con esas personas. Han querido mucho ir al doctor y la verdad sinceramente en el doctor no los atienden. ¿Por qué no los atienden? Porque son discapacitados, no tienen una vivienda digna, porque para poderte atender en un centro de salud te piden credencial o te piden un comprobante de domicilio, y para eso es muy difícil tener una credencial y un comprobante de domicilio. ¿Por qué? Porque están en situación de calle. Entonces, hay muchas discriminaciones de parte de los doctores, de las autoridades. Las autoridades los ven con discapacidades, los empujan, los patean. Muchas veces yo me metí en muchos problemas por meterme a defender a las personas. Entonces yo fui viviendo ahí, en la calle, y yo no me daba cuenta que mis 2 hijas tenían discapacidades. La verdad, pues que yo estaba en el olvido, yo estaba en la calle, yo iba al doctor, nunca me decía que mis hijas tenían discapacidades. Entonces cuando yo pido, la verdad, pedí aquí en el Caracol, pedí la ayuda para un doctor, y pues ellos hicieron valer mis derechos y decían que yo tenía derecho, aunque yo fuera de la calle tenía derechos. Me llevaron al doctor y ahí me dijeron que mis hijas tenían discapacidades no visibles. Entonces yo decido de salirme de las calles, porque yo quería darle una mejor vida a mis hijas fuera de las calles, porque yo no quería que mis hijas vivieran lo que viven los que tienen discapacidad en la calle. No quiero que mis hijas vivan eso. Entonces yo voy a rentar un cuarto, y pues ahorita estoy rentando un cuarto, la verdad, sinceramente me la veo difícil, porque pues tengo que trabajar limpiando vidrio, vendiendo dulces. Y mis hijas van a la escuela, llevo un gasto, soy madre soltera. Entonces ahorita me dijeron que había un programa para la ayuda para personas discapacidades, y yo voy con esa fuerza y decir, pues voy a pedir ayuda para que yo con esa ayuda yo pague una renta, medicamentos, vayan a la escuela mis hijas. y todo, pero yo al hacer, me dieron el certificado médico, porque cuando a mí me dicen que tienen discapacidad, pues me dan un certificado médico. Yo voy a pedir la ayuda y me dicen que no me podían dar ayuda porque mis hijas no tienen discapacidades no visibles, que son, o sea, que no tienen la discapacidad visible, que son no visibles. Entonces, pues a mí me entristece, ¿no? Me entristece porque aunque ellas no tengan discapacidad visible, están sufriendo por dentro. Entonces, yo dije, ¿cuál es la ayuda entonces? ¿Cómo tienen que verse mis hijas? Y aunque tienen la discapacidad visible, hay veces que el gobierno no les ayuda. Entonces, para mí fue una tristeza regresarme sin que me dieran el apoyo. Ya después me contactaron y me dijeron que me iban a hacer la entrevista y me dicen que a ver si me la daban, porque no tenían discapacidad visible. Yo siento que tengan visible la discapacidad o no tengan visible, tienen el mismo derecho de la ayuda. Y pues yo siento que ahí fue como una discriminación a mis hijas, la verdad, porque pues están diciendo que no, como que están saltando el certificado médico del doctor. Y pues la verdad, yo lo que le pediría al gobierno que pues pusieran más atención a las personas de calle que tienen discapacidades, como permitirle que las atiendan en un centro de salud sin que les pidan un documento, porque la verdad no lo tienen, porque son abandonadas, porque son personas como yo que no saben leer y escribir, porque son personas que no saben sus derechos y abusan de sus derechos de ellos. Entonces yo la verdad, yo quiero decirles a todos que la verdad, que pues ayuden a las personas, porque como vi en el video que pusieron de personas discapacitadas, yo reconocí a dos personas que conozco y viven en un albergue y la verdad los tienen muy mal. Y esas personas que salieron en el video que ahorita los vi, la verdad viven en un lugar muy feo. Y pues la verdad a mí me interesa que ayuden a las personas y la verdad yo les voy a ser honesta, yo no estoy preparada ni escribo nada para poder hablar. Yo solamente lo saco de mi pecho y de mi corazón y de mi pensamiento y de la humanidad que yo soy humana. Y yo a lo mejor no les hablo como quisiera yo hablar como ustedes que están preparados, pero en el fondo de mí yo le hablo como yo entiendo y como yo siento. Y yo la verdad, no sé leer, no sé escribir, pero me da mucho gusto que me hayan tomado en cuenta, porque para mí es muy importante alzar la voz por las personas discapacitadas de calle, porque ellos no pueden alzar la voz, pero me tienen a mí para alzar la voz. Y como yo les dije, una frase, vivimos sin techo, pero no sin derecho. Y yo quiero que el derecho se los hagan valer a las personas de calle. Bueno, muchas gracias.
Te agradecemos muchísimo que nos hayas compartido tu experiencia, Rosalinda. Yo creo que esto es lo más importante. Tú lo has vivido directamente. Me sorprende mucho que nos platiques que reconoces a dos personas del video. Algunas de las fotos no son tan nuevas. Quiere decir que estas personas seguramente siguen viviendo en estos lugares institucionalizadas por mucho tiempo. Lamentamos mucho que no hayas visto apoyos que te hayan discriminado con tus niñas para recibir los apoyos del gobierno. Con mucho gusto podemos platicar con el Caracol y contigo para ver de qué forma podemos apoyarte y pues apoyar a las niñas, ¿no? En estos procesos. Les agradezco muchísimo. Ya estamos casi fuera de tiempo. Únicamente mi participación para cerrar. Eh, um, Quisiera mencionar que si alguna persona aquí de la prensa, de los medios, tiene alguna pregunta adicional y les gustaría tomar más tiempo para las preguntas, lo podemos hacer por medio de otro link de reunión que mi compañera Majo les va a compartir en un momento en la sección de preguntas y respuestas y ahí pudiéramos abordar un poco más el tema. Únicamente para cerrar, me gustaría agregar que, pues que no se puede negar lo que se está viendo, lo que las personas están viviendo, lo que Rosalinda nos acaba de compartir en su experiencia personal. Ella es experta por experiencia, porque lo ha vivido, porque ha estado ahí, pues no es refutable. No podemos decir que México no está realizando actos que son graves y sistemáticos, violaciones graves y sistemáticas. Y desde mi trabajo en DRI, creo que este es un informe que no únicamente tiene que hablarle al movimiento de las personas con discapacidad, sino que este informe también nos representa una oportunidad para expandirnos y hablar no únicamente de discapacidad, sino la discapacidad con las distintas interseccionalidades, como lo platicó Steven, ¿no? Estamos hablando de infancias con discapacidad institucionalizadas en casas hogar, en centros de asistencia social públicos y privados de manera indefinida. Hablamos de personas migrantes detenidas en centros de detención migratorios, lo que complejiza su situación y su acceso a oportunidades. Hablamos de personas indígenas, especialmente de niñas, niños y adolescentes en los albergues escolares indígenas que por falta de educación en sus comunidades, por falta de educación inclusiva, tienen que elegir entre vivir en una familia o vivir en una institución para recibir educación. Hablamos de personas con uso problemático de sustancias que son ingresados a los centros para adicciones que conocemos en México comúnmente como anexos. Y estos no son casos únicos. Todos los días los vemos en las noticias, una y otra vez personas detenidas en contra de su voluntad e ingresadas a centros de rehabilitación, tengan o no tengan adicciones. Hemos encontrado niñas, niños, adolescentes, personas con discapacidad sin consumo de sustancias en centros de rehabilitación para adicciones. Hablamos también de la agenda de desapariciones, que es un tema muy complejo en México y que toca directamente nuestros corazones, porque las personas con discapacidad desaparecen en las instituciones. También hemos visto que el sistema desaparece a las personas en las instituciones porque sus familias no saben dónde están, ellas ni siquiera saben en dónde se encuentran y qué pueden hacer al respecto. En este informe también, como nos platicaba Rosalinda, nos referimos a las poblaciones en situación de calle que son puestas en albergues en contra de su voluntad, sin opciones de vivienda, trabajo o educación. El informe también nos habla de una realidad para la cual vamos todas las personas, que son las personas mayores viviendo en instituciones, en lo que conocemos como asilos. La población mayor en México va en aumento, entonces sería ir buscando alternativas comunitarias para que todas las personas podamos vivir en la comunidad y no en instituciones y en asilos en unos 10, 20, 30 años, ¿no? El comité hace un llamamiento a la desinstitucionalización y nos habla de fechas claras, de indicadores y metas para lograrlos. También algo que resaltaba Steven y me parece muy importante es asegurarnos de que la cooperación internacional no está destinando recursos al mantenimiento de instituciones. Y bueno, este no es un informe únicamente para hablar de personas con discapacidad psicosocial, intelectual, institucionalizadas. Este informe es para toda la comunidad de personas con discapacidad también, porque el informe nos habla sobre generar oportunidades laborales, que nos ponían en el chat distintas preguntas sobre la cuestión laboral. Entonces, el informe lo refleja, el informe nos habla del acceso a la asistencia personal que es necesario, de la vivienda accesible, de la participación en las personas con discapacidad en estos procesos y de generar distintas oportunidades educativas, de salud, de servicios de salud mental accesibles en las comunidades. El informe está pidiendo al Estado mexicano responder a los daños causados por la institucionalización y proporcionar reparaciones. Estas violaciones graves y sistemáticas tienen que ser atendidas y no podemos quedarnos esperando, como lo mencionaban también, años a que las generaciones cambien y entonces la vida de las personas que están en este momento en instituciones parezcan que no son importantes. Son importantes y necesitamos dar una respuesta ahora, en este momento. No pueden vivir otros 10, 20 años institucionalizadas esperando que el Estado esté con una propuesta de desinstitucionalización progresiva. Por parte de Disability Rights International cerramos este seminario, pero les recordamos que si alguien gusta unirse al link que puso María José, mi colega Majo, en el chat de preguntas y respuestas, pueden por favor unirse y podemos seguir contestando todas sus dudas. No sé si alguien más de DRI quisiera agregar algo. Eric, Priscila, y si no, pues ya cerramos.
Just thank you, Lisbeth, for the amazing and wonderful work that you are doing here. It's just been inspiring to hear from our speakers, the members of the committee, Rosa, Idalia, and Marcus, your deeply personal observations from your visits to institutions. It really shows how getting people into institutions matters so much. And we at DRI will be developing a new training program to help disability rights groups all over the world get their way into institutions. We need to document this, we need to expose it. And 20 years after the CRPD, it's time to close down those institutions. Let's not forget those people. Let's protect their rights. Thanks to you all.
I also just want to add my thanks to the amazing panelists and as well to Ms. Aldana and Mr. Schaefer for their hard work to get the inquiry documented, and we are so grateful. We filed this inquiry in 2020. I remember when we were having these discussions about sending the documentation to the CRPD committee, getting the information together, and I just seeing it completed, seeing it as a report. It's amazing. It's incredible. We are so grateful for the powerful findings and recommendations. And as Eric has mentioned, and many other colleagues as well, this will be used for Mexico, but also for Latin America, and we also hope as a precedent for the whole world.
Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias y seguimos en contacto. Hasta luego.